I gave up on a Wednesday. Not the kind of giving up where you make a decision and feel something. The kind where you wake up, look at the ceiling, and realize you stopped caring somewhere between last Tuesday and now, and you can't even remember which day it happened. My name is Robert Hayes. I am 60 years old. And the morning my divorce from Linda was finalized, I drove home from the courthouse, sat in my car in the driveway, and ate a gas station sandwich because I couldn't think of a single reason to cook a real meal. That was 8 months ago. Since then, I had built a very clean, very small life. I went to work. I came home. I heated things up in a microwave that still had Linda's settings saved on it. I watched television I didn't care about and fell asleep in a chair that still had the indentation of someone else's routine pressed into it. I told myself this was fine. I told myself men my age didn't need much. I told myself the quiet was peaceful. It wasn't peaceful. It was a waiting room with no appointment. The worst part wasn't being alone. I could handle alone. The worst part was how fast I got good at it. How fast I stopped noticing that I hadn't had a real conversation in 4 days. How fast I learned to fill a grocery cart with exactly the right amount of food for one person without feeling anything about it. I had become invisible. Not to other people. To myself. Clover Ridge is the kind of neighborhood where people wave from their driveways and mean nothing by it. Everybody is polite. Nobody is close. There are barbecues in the summer and holiday lights in December and a neighborhood association newsletter that nobody reads. I had lived here for 11 years, first with Linda, then just with her absence wearing the shape of every room. My neighbor to the right was Ted Garner. 64. Loud. The kind of man who had been divorced twice and decided that made him wise instead of unlucky. He was always on his porch. Always watching. Always ready with a comment wrapped in a joke, so you couldn't argue without seeming like the problem. My neighbor to the left was a house I had barely thought about in 2 years. That was about to matter. It was a late August afternoon. The kind where the air sits heavy and doesn't move, and you can smell rain coming an hour before it arrives. I was on my back porch with a cold cup of coffee I had forgotten to drink, staring at nothing in particular, when I heard something that did not belong in an ordinary Tuesday. A car pulling into the driveway next door. I didn't look up right away. That was how far gone I was. A new neighbor moving in, and I couldn't even work up the energy to glance over the fence. But then I heard something else. A box dropped. A quiet word that wasn't quite a curse. And then silence, the kind that follows when someone is doing something hard by themselves and doesn't want to ask for help. I looked up. She was standing in the driveway next door, both hands pressed against the side of a large moving box, trying to slide it toward the front door without dropping it. She was not young, not trying to look young. She was somewhere in her early 50s, auburn hair loose around her shoulders, wearing jeans and a gray shirt with a small paint stain on the sleeve. She looked like someone who had packed that box herself, driven it here herself, and fully intended to unpack it herself. She looked like someone who had learned not to wait for help. I set down my coffee cup. I did not go over. Not yet. I told myself it wasn't my business. I told myself she probably had people coming. I watched her wrestle that box to the porch and disappear inside and come back for another one, and I sat in my chair like the very useful and engaged human being I had become. The rain started around 5. Not a polite rain. A serious one. The sky opened with the kind of intention that makes you feel like the weather has a point to make. And somewhere in the middle of it, I heard a crack from the side yard that I felt more than heard. I walked out back. One of the fence posts between my yard and the house to the left had split at the base. The whole section was leaning at an angle, straining against the boards, one good gust away from going flat. I stood in the rain staring at it. I could go back inside. I was good at going back inside. I could put a note on the fence in the morning. I could call someone later in the week. I had a long and documented history of choosing later. But something about standing in that rain, watching something broken lean further and further toward the ground, made me tired of myself in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. I went to the garage, grabbed the toolbox, pulled on a jacket that didn't help much, walked out into the wet grass with a flashlight tucked under my arm and no real plan except to stop something from falling. I had just gotten my hands on the post when I heard her voice. Mr. Hayes. I turned around fast enough to embarrass myself. She was standing at the edge of the fence line in a rain jacket that looked like it had been grabbed in a hurry, holding a flashlight of her own, her hair dark with rain along the edges. I had no idea she even knew my name. "Sorry," she said quickly, seeing my expression. "The mailbox. I saw it when I moved in." She nodded at the leaning fence. "I heard it crack. Sounded bad." She paused. "Are you okay?" 3 words. Simple as anything. "Are you okay?" I could not remember the last time anyone had asked me that without a reason attached to it. Not, "Are you okay because you seemed off at work?" Not, "Are you okay because I need something from you?" Just the question sitting there, plain and direct, with nowhere to hide from it. "I'm fine," I said, because that was what I always said. "Just the fence." She looked at the post, then at me, then at the rain coming down between us. "That post is going to go," she said. "You need someone on the other side holding pressure while you drive the screw in." It wasn't a question. It wasn't an offer exactly. It was just a fact, delivered by someone who had looked at a problem and identified a solution and was already stepping through the gap in the fence before I said a word. Her name was Claire Owens. We worked in the rain for 20 minutes. She held. I hammered. The wind pushed back. The wood was soft from the wet ground and the first 2 screws didn't catch. She didn't complain. She didn't tell me how to do it differently. She just kept steady pressure on the boards and waited while I figured it out. At some point we both leaned into the fence at the same time and it shifted and she laughed, a real one, surprised out of her, and I laughed too without planning to, and for about 4 seconds I forgot that I had spent the last 8 months eating microwave dinners in front of a television I didn't care about. When the post finally held, we both stepped back. She was soaked. I was soaked. The rain was still going. "That'll hold," she said, pressing on the boards once with her palm to check. "Yeah," I said. "Thank you. You didn't have to do that." She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not pity. Not warmth exactly. Something more honest than either of those. "I heard it crack," she said simply. What was I going to do? Go back inside? She said goodnight and walked back through the gap in the fence toward her house. And I stood in the wet grass watching her go and feeling something I had not felt in a long time. Not attraction. Not hope. Not anything that had a clean name. Just the faint, uncomfortable awareness that I had been alone for a very long time and had almost convinced myself that was the same thing as being okay. The fence held through the night. I did not sleep well. I saw Claire the next morning before I was ready to. I was at the end of my driveway in yesterday's clothes collecting the newspaper I didn't really read when her front door opened and she came out carrying a mug in both hands, moving carefully the way you do when the coffee is too full and too hot. She was wearing a green flannel shirt and her hair was loose, still a little damp from an early shower. She saw me at the same moment I saw her. Neither of us pretended we hadn't. "Morning," she said from her porch. "Morning," I said from my driveway. There was a pause that could have been awkward and somehow wasn't. She looked at the fence, then back at me. "It held," she said. "It held," I confirmed. She nodded once like that settled something, and went back inside. That was it. That was the whole thing. And I stood at the end of my driveway for longer than I needed to, holding a newspaper I wasn't going to read, thinking about how that 30-second conversation was the best part of my week so far, and it was only Thursday. That scared me more than I wanted to admit. I went back to work. I sat in meetings. I answered emails. I drove home on autopilot and microwaved something I don't even remember eating. But in the background, underneath all of it, something was running quiet that hadn't been running before. I kept thinking about the question she had asked in the rain. "Are you okay?" I kept thinking about how fast I had answered, and how wrong my answer had been. Friday came without fanfare. I was in the garage looking for a wrench I didn't need when I noticed movement in Claire's driveway. She was unloading flat-pack furniture from her car, the kind that comes in long, narrow boxes that are impossible to carry alone. She had one end on her shoulder and was trying to walk sideways toward her front door. I watched for about 4 seconds. Then I walked over. "I can take that end," I said. She stopped, looked at me. Her expression was careful, measuring, the way people look when they're deciding whether to accept help or insist they don't need it. She let me take the end. We got it through the door without talking much. The inside of her house was still the careful chaos of someone who had recently arrived. Boxes pushed to the walls, furniture not yet where it would eventually live, lamps on the floor instead of tables. Bookcases, she said, nodding at the box. 3 of them. I keep buying more books than I have shelves for. Where do you want it? She pointed to the far wall of the living room. I set it down. She went to the car for the second one and I followed without being asked. On the third trip, she said, "You don't have to do all of this." "I know," I said. She let me help anyway. We got all 3 boxes inside and she made coffee without making a thing of it. Just asked if I wanted some and handed me a mug when I said yes. We stood in her kitchen because the chairs weren't in a useful arrangement yet and the counter was clean enough to lean against. "How long were you married?" she asked. Not how long have you lived here, not what do you do for work. She went straight to the real thing, quiet and direct, like she already knew we were past small talk. 22 years, I said. She nodded. How long has it been since it ended? Finalized 8 months ago, I said. Falling apart for longer than that. She looked at her coffee mug. My husband passed 4 years ago, she said. Heart attack. Fast. No warning. She paused. People think loss is the hard part, but it's the afterwards that gets you. All that space where a person used to be. The kitchen was quiet. Yeah, I said. The space is the hard part. She looked up at me then, not with sadness, with the particular steady expression of someone who has already done the work of carrying a hard thing and is not interested in pretending it wasn't heavy. You stopped expecting things, she said. It wasn't a question. Pretty much, I admitted. I did too, she said. For about 1.5 years. She took a sip of her coffee. Then it started to feel like a waste. I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. And she didn't rush to fill the silence. She just let it sit there, and it wasn't uncomfortable, which surprised me. After a while she asked if I knew anything about assembling flat-pack furniture. I told her I knew enough to regret starting. She laughed at that. A real one, not polite. We spent the next 2 hours on the living room floor with instruction sheets that seemed designed by someone who had never actually built anything. She read, I sorted pieces. We argued once about which piece was labeled G and which was labeled C because the printing was nearly identical, and at some point she went to get a second cup of coffee and came back and handed me one without asking, and I noticed that nobody had done that in a long time. Just that. Just knowing what someone needed without being asked. By the time the last bookcase was standing, it was late afternoon. We both sat back and looked at what we had made. Good, she said. Solid, I agreed. She turned to look at me then, not smiling exactly, but with something open in her expression. I don't rush things, she said. I learned that after my husband died. Rushing through hard feelings doesn't make them shorter. It just makes them louder later. I wasn't sure if she was talking about the furniture or something else entirely. I've been doing the opposite, I said. Not rushing. Not moving at all. She considered that. There's a difference between stillness and hiding, she said quietly. That sentence landed in me somewhere I wasn't expecting. Before I could figure out what to say, she stood and stretched and said she should start dinner, that her daughter was calling later and she didn't like talking on an empty stomach. I said good night and walked back across to my house. I sat down at my kitchen table, not at the counter, not standing up, at the table like a person who intended to be somewhere. Outside, the last of the afternoon light was going gold across the yard. The fixed fence held its line between our 2 properties, clean and even. I thought about what she had said. There's a difference between stillness and hiding. I had told myself for 8 months that I was being still, being careful, being reasonable. But sitting there in that kitchen, I could feel it for the first time without being able to talk myself out of it. I had been hiding, and the most frightening part was not the hiding itself. It was the slow, creeping awareness that someone next door had figured that out about me in less than 48 hours, and had said it out loud without cruelty, without making it a lesson. Just said it like it was true, because it was. I stayed at that table until it was fully dark. And when I finally got up to make dinner, I did something I hadn't done in 8 months. I actually cooked. Ted Garner ruined a perfectly good Saturday in about 11 words. I had almost made it through the whole party without incident. Almost. It had been 2 weeks since Claire and I built those bookshelves. 2 weeks of small, careful moments. A wave from the driveway. A brief conversation over the fence about the noise the raccoons were making at night. A cup of coffee on her porch one morning that lasted longer than either of us planned and ended when her phone rang and she excused herself and I walked home feeling something I was not ready to name. Nothing had been said. Nothing had been declared. But something was growing in the space between our two houses, quiet and unhurried. The way she seemed to prefer things. Then Ted Garner threw a barbecue. He texted half the block on a Thursday. Burgers at 3. Bring a chair. The kind of invitation that is actually a summons, because if you don't show up, Ted will notice and make a comment about it the next time he sees you that will follow you for a month. I almost didn't go. I sat with my phone for a long time reading those 4 words. Burgers at 3. Bring a chair. I thought about the version of me from 9 months ago who would have arrived early and stayed late and laughed at everything. I thought about the version of me from 3 months ago who would have deleted the text and pretended he never saw it. I thought about what Claire had said. There's a difference between stillness and hiding. I went. Ted's backyard was already loud when I arrived. Country music from a speaker on the porch railing. The smell of charcoal and cut grass. Couples standing in clusters with drinks in their hands, talking about nothing the way people do when they're comfortable with each other and comfortable with the world. I stood at the edge of it all for a moment, holding a beer I hadn't opened yet, feeling like someone watching a movie he wasn't in. Then I saw Claire. She was near the food table talking to an older woman named Beverly from the end of the street. She had a glass of lemonade in one hand and was nodding at something Beverly was saying. And when she saw me across the yard, her expression did something small and real. Not a performance. Just relief. The same kind I had seen in her kitchen when I came back to help carry the second bookcase without being asked.
I walked over.
Beverly smiled at both of us like she was filing something away for later. Then she drifted toward the grill and left us standing together near the folding table with a bowl of potato salad between us. You came, Claire said. You sound surprised. I said. A little, she admitted. You seem like someone who talks himself out of things. That landed. I let it. Getting better at that, I said. She looked at me for a moment, then away, and we stood there watching Ted perform for his guests the way he always did. Big voice, bigger laugh, moving through the yard like a man who had decided confidence was the same thing as being okay. For a while it was fine. Actually fine. Claire and I moved through the afternoon the way two people do when they are not yet anything defined but are also not nothing. We talked to other neighbors. We separated and came back together without making a point of it. I laughed at something she said about the raccoons and she laughed at something I said about Ted's speaker being loud enough to count as a noise violation. It was the most normal I had felt in nearly a year. Then Ted made his way over. He had that look he gets. The one where he thinks he's about to be funny and hasn't checked yet whether anyone wants him to be. He looked from Claire to me and back again. He let the silence sit for 1 second too long. Then he said it, loud enough for the 4 people nearest to us to hear every word. Well, look at Robert Hayes finally rejoining the human race. People laughed. The polite kind of laugh that means please don't aim that at me next. Ted raised his bottle in my direction. Didn't think we'd see you coming out of that house again, man. Good to know you're still alive. Still here, I said, keeping my voice easy. Ted grinned and looked at Claire. You responsible for dragging him back out? Claire smiled without showing her teeth. He makes his own choices, she said. Ted nodded like she had confirmed something he already believed. Then he tilted his head and said, with the particular confidence of a man who thinks cruelty is the same as honesty. Just be careful, both of you. Starting over at our age sounds real good right until it doesn't. He made a short downward gesture with his hand. Trust me. I know. He moved on. Someone near the grill called his name and he turned away like he hadn't just dropped a small grenade between us. The air changed. I felt Claire go still beside me. Not hurt. Something quieter than that. She was watching me. Not demanding anything. Not asking for anything. Just watching to see what I would do with what had just happened. And I made the wrong call. He's harmless, I said, keeping my voice low and even. He just likes to hear himself talk. Claire nodded once, said nothing. He doesn't know what he's talking about, I added. No, she agreed. He doesn't. But that wasn't what she was waiting for. I could feel it, the way you can feel a door closing slowly before it latches. She wasn't waiting for me to dismiss Ted. She was waiting to see if I would say something true. Something that acknowledged what was actually happening between us instead of brushing past it like it was nothing. I didn't. I picked up my beer and said something about the food, and the moment passed and we both let it. She left an hour later, said goodbye to the neighbors around her, then said goodbye to me last with a smile that was perfectly polite and almost nothing else. I watched her walk to her car. I stayed another 40 minutes. Laughed when I was supposed to. Finished my beer. Helped Ted carry the folding table back to his garage because that's what you do when you're trying to look like everything is fine. On the drive home, the street was quiet. The sky was that dark blue that comes right before full night. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a while with the engine off. I had done the thing I promised myself I was done doing. I had made myself small to make someone else comfortable. The next morning I knocked on Claire's door. She answered it with a dish towel in her hand, which meant I had caught her in the middle of something real, not prepared, not positioned. I owe you honesty, I said. She leaned against the doorframe and looked at me, not cold, careful. When Ted said what he said, I started. I should have told him the truth instead of talking around it. What's happening here matters. I don't know what to call it yet, but it matters, and I treated it like it was nothing, and that was wrong. She was quiet for a moment, just looking at me. I don't need you to fight anyone for me, she said. I never did. I know, I said. What I need, she said slowly, is to know that when it counts, you're actually there, not performing, not managing. There. I know that too, I said. I wasn't.
I'm sorry.
She held my eyes for a long moment. Then she stepped back from the door. I was about to make eggs, she said. You want some? I stepped inside. It wasn't forgiveness wrapped in a bow. It wasn't a reset. It was something more honest than either of those. It was a chance I had not wasted, and both of us knew it. 3 days after the eggs, Claire's daughter arrived. I didn't know she was coming until I saw the unfamiliar car in the driveway on a Wednesday evening. A dusty sedan with a child's drawing taped crookedly in the back window. I was getting my mail when a woman came out of Claire's front door carrying an empty box, stopped when she saw me, and gave me the particular look that people give strangers when they're not sure yet if they should be friendly. She looked like Claire around the eyes. You must be the neighbor, she said. Robert, I said. She nodded.
Meg.
She went back inside without another word, and I finished getting my mail and went home and thought about that for a while. Meg was 31, separating from her husband. She had driven 8 hours with 2 suitcases and a look on her face that I recognized because I had worn it myself once. The look of someone who has just made a decision that was necessary and painful and is not yet sure they will survive the aftermath. I knew, because Claire told me the next morning over coffee on her porch. Speaking quietly enough that I understood this was not something she discussed easily. She thinks she waited too long, Claire said, to leave. She's beating herself up over the years. I thought about that. She's 31, I said. I know, Claire said. I keep telling her that. She doesn't believe me yet. We sat with that for a moment. Did you ever feel that way? I asked. After your husband passed. Like you had somehow lost too much time. Claire turned her mug in her hands. For a while, she said. Then I decided time wasn't the thing I should be measuring. Before I could ask what she meant, Meg appeared at the door saying she couldn't find the extra blankets, and Claire excused herself and went inside. And I sat alone on her porch with my coffee, feeling like I had been one question away from something important. That happened a lot with Claire. The week that followed had a different texture to it. Meg's presence in the house next door shifted the rhythm of things. Claire was less available, more focused inward, doing what mothers do when their children are hurting. I respected it. I gave her space without disappearing, which was a balance I was still learning. I started fixing things, not as an excuse to be near her, actually fixing things. There was a loose board on my back porch steps I had been stepping over for 6 months. I replaced it. There was a gutter along the side of the house that had been pulling away from the fascia since last spring. I borrowed a ladder from the shed, climbed up on a windless afternoon, and reattached it properly. Small things, physical and real, the kind of work that quiets the loud places in your head. One afternoon I was up on that ladder when Meg came out of Claire's back door and stood in the yard with a mug, looking at nothing in particular the way people do when they are thinking about something they can't solve. "It gets easier," I said from the ladder. She looked up, startled. Then, after a moment, "Does it really? Or is that just something people say?" I climbed down, stood at the base of the ladder and considered being diplomatic. "Both," I said. "For a while you say it because you're supposed to. Then one day you realize you actually mean it." She looked at me like she was deciding whether I was worth trusting. "How long did that take? For you?" "Longer than it should have," I said. "But I spent most of it hiding." She was quiet. Then, "My mom talks about you." I didn't say anything. "Not a lot," Meg added quickly. "Just enough." She went back inside. I stood there for a moment at the bottom of the ladder in the afternoon quiet, thinking about just enough and what it meant. That night, the power went out. Not just our block. The whole east side of Clover Ridge, knocked dark by a transformer that blew 2 streets over in a wind that came up fast after dinner. I was in the kitchen when the lights snapped off and the hum of the refrigerator died and the house dropped into a thick, complete silence. I found my flashlight, stood at the back window. Claire's house was dark. I thought about the key. She had given it to me 2 days earlier, the morning after our conversation on the porch about Meg. She had set it on the porch railing without ceremony, next to my coffee mug, and said, "In case something happens and I'm not here, Meg gets anxious in the dark." She paused. "And you're responsible with things."
Even noticed.
I had carried it in my jacket pocket since then. Small and brass and heavier than a key had any right to be. I crossed the yard in the dark. I knocked first, twice, called her name. Nothing. Then Meg's voice from inside, not scared but careful. "Hello. It's Robert," I said. "From next door. Is your mom home?" "She ran to the pharmacy before this happened," Meg said through the door. "She's not back yet. You okay in there?" A pause. "The dark is a little much," she admitted quietly. I used the key. Inside, I found the emergency candles in the kitchen drawer where Claire had mentioned they were. I lit 4 of them and set them around the living room, and Meg sat on the couch with her knees pulled up in her mug and looked at the light with an expression that was grateful and a little embarrassed about being grateful. We sat there without talking for a while. The candles were enough. When Claire came through the front door 20 minutes later and saw the lit room and the 2 of us sitting in it, she stopped in the doorway and looked at the scene, and something moved across her face that I couldn't fully read but did not want to look away from. "Power's out," I said. "I can see that," she said. She looked at Meg. "You okay?" "Robert came over," Meg said simply. Claire looked at me. Not the careful, measured look from the first weeks. Something more open than that. Something that had been building through fence repairs and flat-pack bookshelves and backyard barbecues and honest mornings on the porch. After Meg went to bed, Claire and I sat at the kitchen table with the last 2 candles burning low between us. "I want to say something," I said. "And I want to say it right, so I'm going to say it slow." She waited. "I spent almost a year convinced I was done," I said. "Not sad about it. Just done. Like a chapter that finished and the book was closed." I looked at the candle between us. "You didn't rescue me. That's not what happened. But you stayed real when it would have been easier not to. You said true things when I was ready to only hear comfortable things. And you did it without making me feel like a project." Claire was quiet for a moment. "You did the work," she said. "I just didn't pretend I couldn't see you doing it." "That was enough," I said. "That was more than enough." She reached across the table, rested her hand over mine, steady and without performance. Neither of us spoke for a while. The power came back on at 11. The lights blinked once and the refrigerator hummed back to life and the ordinary world returned around us. We didn't cheer. We didn't move. In the morning, Meg made breakfast for all three of us without being asked, moving around her mother's kitchen like she was starting to believe she belonged somewhere again. She burned the toast a little and didn't apologize for it. Claire poured coffee. I set the table. It was ordinary. It was unhurried. It was chosen. Outside, Ted Garner was on his porch with his coffee, watching the street the way he always did. He saw me through Claire's front window and raised his mug. I raised mine back. Then I turned back to the table. Claire was looking at me when I turned around, and she was smiling the real kind. Not careful, not measured, just real. And I thought about how long I had been looking at my own life from the outside and how different it felt to finally be standing inside it again. We didn't make promises about forever. People our age know better than that. We made plans for the afternoon instead. A walk, Claire said, through the back path behind the neighborhood where the trees were still thick and the noise of everything else dropped away. Meg wanted to come. I said yes without hesitating. And that was it. That was how it began. Not with a grand declaration, not with a perfect moment, but with a walk through the trees on an ordinary afternoon with people who had decided, without rushing, to keep showing up for each other. Some doors, once you stop hiding behind them, turn out to open into something you didn't know you were still allowed to want. I stopped giving up that Wednesday in late August in the rain. I just didn't know it yet.